how to stop overgiving and find inner peace. Buddhist teachings. You are lying awake right now, locked in a heavy, quiet state of emotional depletion. Your ribs aching with a dry emptiness after years of pouring your care, loyalty, and vital energy into a one-sided connection where your warmth is accepted as a given, but you are never truly chosen or held in return. Maybe you spent your waking hours today reaching across an invisible chasm, offering quiet sacrifices, checking in on someone who rarely asks about your world, and returning to your room carrying a painful realization that you are doing all the emotional labor for a relationship that leaves you completely drained. The atmosphere surrounding your frame tonight is cool, grounded, and deeply sheltered. The rustic, earthy aromas of wet limestone dust, crushed wild mint, damp pine bark, cold mountain mist, and dry oak leaf ash drift softly through the space, while the firm mattress supports your exhausted spine, offering a quiet, sheltered stone terrace that asks no frantic pumping from your heart. Dear friend, this heavy ache of unreturned devotion does not mean you are foolish, nor does it mean your love was a waste. You are merely like a tired mountain gardener standing beside an elevated cliffside cistern, desperately cranking a heavy wooden hand pump, fitted with a boxwood valve piston to force water uphill against gravity. You do not have to force your vital stream up that dry cliff before morning comes, and no voice in this quiet room expects you to break your own gears to prove your devotion. Your heart is not a dry pump meant to burn its leather seals in vain, and nothing tonight will demand that you force water into a container that refuses to hold it. Right now, you are gently invited to set down the wooden crank, permitting your inner spring to settle into its own natural, self-filling basin. A surprising, deeply liberating truth emerges from ancient Buddhist reflection when we face the exhaustion of unrequited care. We often assume that true devotion means endlessly pouring our energy into a relationship regardless of reciprocity, believing that if we stop striving, we are being selfish, cold, or weak. Yet contemplative wisdom reveals that trying to force emotional reciprocity against the natural incline of an author's heart is like trying to siphon spring water straight up a sheer granite wall. A wooden piston forced against gravity will eventually crack its boxwood fittings, leaving the gardener broken without ever filling the elevated tank. Authentic compassion is not an upward struggle that drains the source. It is a deep, natural terrace well that fills to its brimful edge before spilling softly into the meadows below. The exhausted mind mistakenly insists that stopping the pump means abandoning love altogether. It endlessly replays moments of imbalance, urging you to crank harder, overgive further, and sacrifice your own peace until the other person finally turns toward you with gratitude. But a limestone basin carved into a mountain terrace does not nourish the surrounding orchard by forcing its water uphill through cracked pipes. It simply sits level on its stone foundation, receiving the cool mountain spring, allowing its own chamber to become completely full before a single drop flows outward. Think of how much vital life force you have burned by trying to force your water up an unholding slope. Maybe you have felt this too, lying awake with a hollow tightness behind your breastbone, calculating how to earn someone's attention, feeling utterly spent by a dynamic that never fills your own cup, trying to force emotional warmth into an elevated cistern that leaks faster than you can pump only exhausts your spirit and leaves your soul bone dry. What if, for these quiet hours, we disconnect the wooden piston and let your inner spring find its own natural level? What if we permit your heart to rest like a deep limestone well filling quietly under a starry mountain sky tonight? Let the small, guarded muscles around your eyes, forehead, and jaw loosen their strain. Release the tight, protective bracing you have been holding in your throat, your shoulders, and your lower ribs. Feel the broad, steady support beneath your frame, carrying your full weight without asking you to solve a single unbalanced relationship tonight. Listen to the long, unhurried cadence of your breath moving through your chest, slow, smooth, and completely peaceful in the dark. There is no one-sided dynamic you must fix right now. Let your breath move like cool spring water settling into a dark stone basin, steady, soft, and entirely unforced. Perhaps you learned early in life to measure your worth by how much you could give without asking for anything in return. Building a habit of intense emotional striving Whenever someone you love grew distant or self-absorbed, in the tradition of Zen wisdom, we do not view your generous heart as a foolish mistake that must be condemned. It is seen as a noble, flowing spring that has simply been hitched to an unnatural, uphill siphon, trying to carry what only gravity and time can balance. You do not need to crack your own boxwood valves to prove that your love is real. You need only to let the water drop back into its natural terrace, trusting that your own vessel deserves to be full. In a short while we will travel to a high mountain terrace where a young waterkeeper weeps beside a broken wooden pump, convinced he must force spring water up a sheer cliff alone. But right now, let your physical frame yield to the simple, unconditional safety of this quiet room. The solid walls around you are secure, keeping out the cold alpine draft, and the dark air here is a calm, neutral shelter that permits your tired mind to lay down its watch. You do not have to earn love, fix an unbalanced bond, or prove your worth to anyone before morning arrives. Your true capacity to give was never dependent on exhausting yourself for those who take your presence for granted. Your spirit was formed like a deep limestone basin, fully equipped with solid walls and a cool, hidden spring capable of holding abundance without being drained dry. Let the tight contraction across your chest dissolve completely. Let your hands uncurl slowly upon the sheets, your palms soft and still, like damp river moss resting beside a quiet stone channel. There is no pump you must crank in this dark room tonight, no distant heart you must chase across the cliff, and no emotional drought strong enough to drain the quiet sanctuary of your presence right now. You have reached the end of the day's long effort, and your present stone foundation is completely level enough to carry your rest. As we move deeper into the quiet night ahead, remember that your true nature is like a terraced stone well in the high hills. It does not lose its purity simply because an upper channel remains dry. The heavy worries drifting through your mind can settle softly into your own deep basin, leaving your central spring cool, grounded, and profoundly safe in the quiet dark. Let the tired muscles along your neck and shoulders sink into the mattress. Let your legs grow heavy and motionless upon the bed, your ankles and feet loose and completely supported by the frame. There is no upward struggle you must maintain in this room tonight, no unreturned devotion you must carry alone, and no spiritual dry spell powerful enough to break the quiet strength resting deep within your spirit right now. You are resting inside your own timeless sanctuary, and your present basin is completely calm enough for you to let the waters settle. High on the windswept stone terraces where the cliffside monastery overlooked the deep valley, the twilight air tasted perpetually of wet limestone dust, crushed wild mint, damp pine bark, cold mountain mist, and dry oak leaf ash. Stationed at this remote mountain pass was a young waterkeeper named Kale, who carried a private, heavy ache of unreturned devotion. Having spent 3 years tending the monastery supply lines, Kale lived under the emotional shadow of an elder scholar on the upper ridge. He longed deeply for this mentor's quiet approval, hoping every single day that his ceaseless labor would finally be acknowledged with warmth. This desperate craving for recognition drove Kale into an exhausting, one-sided cycle of effort. Whenever the upper scholar demanded more water for his private mountain garden, Kale refused to delegate the task. He spent his late afternoons and freezing evenings standing alone at the stone pumping station, straining against a heavy wooden hand crank. The mechanism was fitted with a hand-carved boxwood siphon valve piston, wrapped in layered leather washers. This wooden piston was designed to pull spring water from the lower mountain pool and force it upward through a narrow copper pipe into a dry cistern on the upper cliff. On a freezing, overcast twilight, as cold mountain mist settled thick across the stone terrace, Kale's emotional desperation reached a breaking point. The elder scholar had walked past him earlier that afternoon without a word, accepting a fresh vessel of spring water as if Kale's presence was entirely invisible. A sharp, hollow knot tightened in Kale's chest. Driven by an intense urge to prove his worth, Kale ran to the pumping station. He threw his entire body weight against the wooden crank, determined to fill the upper cistern to overflowing before nightfall. He pushed the heavy crank around and around in violent, rhythmic circles. Deep inside the pump housing, the hand-carved boxwood valve piston slammed against the narrow copper walls with every stroke. because the upper cistern sat 50 feet above the spring. The sheer weight of the water created immense downward pressure. Water naturally wanted to flow downhill, yet Kale was trying to force the entire mountain stream straight up the cliff face by main force. As he cranked faster, the leather washers wrapped around the boxwood piston began to tear. The raw wooden casing of the boxwood valve groaned, split along its central grain, and began to leak. Water sprayed from the pump housing in icy bursts, soaking Kale's wool tunic and muddying his sandals. His palms were raw, blistered, and bleeding against the rough oak handle. He could hear the faint, hollow gurgle of the copper pipe above, showing that despite his agonizing effort, the upper cistern remained nearly empty. Most of the water he pumped was simply slipping past the torn leather washers and draining uselessly into the gravel. Kale clung to the wooden crank, his body trembling with raw exhaustion. Tears of frustration mixing with the cold spray on his face, he pressed his shoulder against the handle, weeping as his muscles burned. In his mind, that dry upper cistern was a mirror of his own life. He believed that if he stopped pumping for even one evening, he would be completely discarded and forgotten. Yet his own spirit was breaking under the impossible effort of forcing love where it would not flow naturally. Stepping softly along the wet limestone flags, carrying a small horn lantern that cast a warm glow across the damp stone, came Master Bowen. Master Bowen was an elder stone fountain builder who had carved the monastery aqueducts 40 years ago. He wore a thick linen apron dark with quarry dust, his face weathered like ancient slate, his eyes calm and completely unhurried. He had quietly observed Kale's desperate evening labors for months, watching how the young keeper burned his youth trying to force water up a dry wall. Master Bowen set his lantern on a limestone bench and walked over to the shuddering pump. He did not shout over the splash of the leaks, nor did he forcefully pull Kale away from the wooden handle. Instead, he reached out a calm hand and placed it gently over Kale's bleeding knuckles. Master Bowen asked Kale to stop pushing for just one breath and to open the wooden pump housing. Kale froze, his chest heaving with ragged gasps. With trembling fingers, he unclasped the iron latches on the wooden pump housing and pulled out the central mechanism. In his hands lay the hand-carved boxwood siphon valve piston. Its leather washers were completely shredded, its wooden body split down the middle, and its surface dripping with muddy water. Master Bowen pointed to the broken boxwood piston in Kale's hands. He asked the young man if a carved piece of wood could ever force a mountain stream to run backward forever without destroying its own heart. Kale stared at the split boxwood valve, feeling the icy water drip onto his raw knees. The truth hit him like a physical blow. The boxwood piston had not failed because it was weak. It had broken because it was being forced to perform an impossible task against the natural laws of the mountain. Master Bowen reached down and opened a heavy bronze gate valve at the base of the lower terrace. He guided Kale to step away from the pump and walk down 3 stone steps to the lower terraced well. Without the wooden pump forcing it upward, the mountain spring followed its natural gravity path. The cool, clear water glided softly through a carved limestone channel, pouring with an easy musical gurgle directly into the deep lower stone basin. In less than a minute, without a single handle being turned or a single muscle being strained, the lower limestone basin filled to its mossy brim. The surface smoothed into a dark crystal mirror that reflected the evening stars, spilling its quiet surplus into the orchard meadows below. Kale dropped his hands to his sides. He sat on the damp stone step beside the full basin, staring at his reflection in the clear, still water. A profound, quiet realization washed over his exhausted chest. He saw with startling clarity how he had spent 3 years acting like that split boxwood piston, constantly trying to force his devotion up an unyielding slope to fill a heart that never held his water. He understood that his relentless overgiving had not built true connection. It had only shredded his own peace and left him bleeding in the dark. He looked up at Master Bowen, watching the clear spring water overflow effortlessly from the lower basin into the wild mint beds below. Yet, as the elder builder picked up his lantern and walked toward the stone workshop, Kale felt a lingering ache remain deep behind his ribs. He understood the physical lesson of the mountain water, but he did not yet know how to stop his own heart from reaching toward the upper cliff when morning arrived. The cold mist continued to drift softly over the high stone terraces, and the mountain spring flowed quietly down its natural path, filling the lower limestone well to the brim while the upper cistern sat dark and dry under the silent night sky. Kale sat quietly on the damp stone steps for a long time, listening to the gentle splash of the full basin, wondering how a human soul could learn to rest in its own deep water without chasing the dry places above. This quiet realization beside the brimful lower basin does not ask you to close your heart, nor does it demand that you become cold and unfeeling toward those you cherish. Authentic spiritual wisdom is never about turning your spirit into dry, impenetrable granite or pretending that unreturned devotion carries no pain. It does not expect you to face a one-sided connection with artificial indifference or stoic silence, feeling a sharp, hollow ache when someone you care for accepts your presence without truly seeing your worth, or experiencing a heavy exhaustion when your care is taken for granted, is a completely natural human response. It simply shows that your heart possesses a rich, natural capacity for warmth. When someone fails to return your devotion, or when a relationship remains stubbornly one-sided despite your best efforts, a real absence of reciprocity exists in your life. That lack of balance carries its own genuine grief. Much like a dry upper terrace during a long summer drought, it asks for quiet kindness, gentle recognition, and soft self-care as it unfolds. Living in connection with others means that emotional currents will not always flow evenly, and some people will simply be unable or unwilling to offer the deep holding you desire. Those moments ask for your honest, grounded awareness as they appear. Yet look closely at what takes place inside your mind during those late hours when you lie awake trying to figure out how to earn another person's care. This is where the exhausting misery of unrequited devotion creates its heaviest strain. Driven by an old, terrifying belief that you are only valuable when you are useful, your thoughts begin to crank the wooden handle faster and faster. You constantly reevaluate your actions, obsessively searching for better ways to give, and punishing yourself for not being enough to turn their heart toward you. You take a simple lack of reciprocity from another person and convert it into a total personal failure, turning your quiet room into a workshop of endless self-sacrifice. This desperate habit of trying to force your water up an unholding slope is what gentle wisdom identifies as the real source of our inner depletion. In daily life, this tension is not an abstract concept. It is that heavy, tight ache in your breastbone when your effort goes completely unnoticed. It is the overwhelming, false conviction that if you do not continuously pump your energy into their world, you will be permanently abandoned and forgotten in the cold. Consider what really happens when you try to act as an upward siphon against the natural incline of another person's heart. The distant behavior or emotional unavailability of the person you love was simply a natural reality of their current capacity, carrying its own limits and choices. But by trying to force your vital spring straight up a sheer wall to fill their dry cistern, your mind creates a crushing secondary agony. The initial reality was merely an uneven channel between two people. Your frantic internal management, your muscle-clenching anxiety, and your refusal to rest are the split boxwood valves and shredded leather washers breaking under impossible pressure. Gentle reflection reveals that most of the exhaustion you carry tonight does not come from the simple fact that someone could not meet you halfway. It grows from the stubborn, unyielding demand that you must force them to hold your water through sheer persistence. It comes from treating their emotional distance as a personal challenge that you must overcome through greater self-denial. The natural flow of life carries no inherent desire to break your heart, but standing at a leaking pump, furiously cracking a split piston against gravity, will always leave your spirit bruised and drained. When we bring a soft, spacious awareness to our protective habits, we are not abandoning those we love, nor are we giving up on genuine connection. True compassion is simply the quiet, courageous willingness to let water follow its natural path without trying to force it uphill with your own ribs. It is the capacity to notice the familiar impulse to grab the wooden crank and to whisper softly to your heart, "This water was never meant to be pumped up a dry wall, and I do not need to shred my own valves to prove my devotion." When you ease the pressure on that internal pump and allow your awareness to settle into the steady stone foundation beneath you, a profound relief washes through your entire frame. This is the comfort of true, self-filling abundance made real in your spirit. Wise awareness recognizes that a deep limestone basin resting level on a stone terrace fills effortlessly to its brimful edge when the spring is allowed to flow naturally. When you stop trying to force your devotion into an unholding container, the terrifying disaster scenarios created by your overthinking dissolve, flowing away into the calm, dark space of your room. The lower terraced well recovers its crystal clarity, not because it fought the slope, but because its design permitted the mountain spring to follow its natural gravity path. The spring fills the basin to its mossy brim without a single handle being turned, allowing the quiet water to nourish the wild mint and plum trees without breaking a single fitting. In the exact same way, when you stop trying to force emotional reciprocity by main force, your heart recovers its natural, unshakable fullness. The need to compulsively chase, prove, and overgive falls away, leaving a calm, steady presence that knows how to love with quiet dignity. This grounded, spacious presence is your true, enduring shelter. It was never built by exhausting self-sacrifice, nor was it diminished when someone failed to appreciate your warmth. The quiet awareness inside you that observes this life is completely unmarred by the neglect you have experienced. It remains calm, clear, and deep, like a natural stone, well holding cool spring water beneath a canopy of mountain stars. Setting down the wooden crank is not an act of bitter resignation. True love for yourself and others is simply the willingness to let water settle where it is truly received. Knowing that the broad stone foundation of your life is completely enough, it is the quiet courage to say, I will keep my own basin whole, and I will allow my care to rest where it flows naturally without force. Slowly, a deep, restorative understanding settles into your spirit. You begin to see that setting down your exhaustion is not a betrayal of love. It is the natural return of a heart coming home to its own proper boundaries. Surrendering the exhausting effort to force another's devotion is not a defeat. It is the quiet doorway to discovering the vast, self-filling peace that has always lived within your core. As you lie here in the soft shelter of your room, feeling the steady bed supporting your frame, you can feel how close this inner relief really is. It does not require you to fix every broken dynamic in your life overnight, nor does it demand that you erase your history before you are permitted to sleep. It requires only a gentle moment of permission, a soft loosening of your grip on the wooden crank, allowing your heart to rest upon the broad, patient stone of this hour under a quiet, starry sky. In a short while, we will practice a very simple way of letting your internal spring fill your own deep basin within your mind. But even right now, as you listen to these soft words, notice how your chest expands and releases without any force. Your breath moves quietly through the dark, supported by the calm air of the room, steady, peaceful, and completely safe exactly as you are. Now, if it feels comfortable for your physical body in this quiet shelter, permit your frame to settle softly into the bed beneath you. There is no rigid posture you must maintain tonight, and no artificial alignment you need to force upon yourself. You might let your arms rest loosely along your sides, or perhaps place one unhurried palm gently over your lower ribs, wherever your throat feels most unburdened. If your eyelids are still hovering open, perhaps you can let them drift shut, inviting the cool dark to shield your vision. Nothing in this stone-scented room is asking you to crank a handle, force water uphill, or earn another's warmth. Draw a slow, unhurried breath in through your nose, letting the cool air expand your lungs, and then release it softly through your lips, letting your spine sink into the mattress like a heavy limestone block resting on quarry sand. You do not need to measure your inhalations or regulate their cadence. Simply permit your torso to rise and fall the way high mountain springs flow into stone basins, steady, unforced, and completely at ease with every quiet exhale. Perhaps you can feel a subtle loosening in the guarded muscles around your temples, your jaw, your upper back, and your solar plexus. If a cold contraction of unreturned devotion or a quiet ache of emotional exhaustion remains locked in your chest, that is completely fine as well. You do not need to push that feeling away or force your heart to feel brimful. Even noticing that old urge to strain against the wooden crank without judging yourself is a moment of deep, gentle restoration. As you rest here in the cool darkness, allow your attention to turn softly toward one specific ache of unreciprocated care that has been keeping your nervous system on edge tonight. It might be a relationship where you carry all the emotional weight, an unacknowledged sacrifice you made today, or a persistent terror that if you stop overgiving, you will be discarded and forgotten. Do not try to solve that dynamic right now, and do not attempt to force a guarantee of mutual devotion before morning comes. Simply let that heavy ache sit quietly in the open space of your awareness, like cold mountain mist hovering over a terraced courtyard. Perhaps you can give a very soft, silent name to what your spirit is experiencing. You might whisper to yourself, "This is the exhaustion of trying to force water uphill." Or perhaps, "This is my mind breaking its wooden valves." By naming this protective pattern with a gentle, forgiving voice, you step back from the edge of depletion. You begin to observe the old habit of desperate striving without letting it shred your internal seals. Now, if it feels right, bring to your mind's eye the image of a hand-carved boxwood siphon valve piston, sitting quietly on a damp limestone bench beside a high mountain terrace. Picture its smooth wooden grain, its worn leather washers, and the copper pump casing resting beside it. Feel the surrounding atmosphere of wet limestone dust, crushed wild mint, damp pine bark, cold mountain mist, and dry oak leaf ash drifting through the elevated courtyard. Imagine taking every unreturned sacrifice, every desperate urge to prove your value, and every painful memory of being taken for granted, and placing them gently into that hand-carved boxwood piston. You do not need to smash the wooden casing with anger, nor do you need to throw the worn leather washers off the cliff with violence. You simply lay the boxwood piston down upon a dry stone shelf, stepping away onto the solid limestone flags under the open sky. Watch what happens in your imagination when the wooden piston is laid down and left untouched. Picture the bronze gate valve at the base of the lower terrace opening smoothly, allowing the cool mountain spring to glide downhill through a carved limestone channel. You do not need to crank a handle, nor do you need to force the stream up a sheer wall. You simply watch the crystal clear water fill the deep lower basin, rising steadily until it reaches the mossy brim, perfectly level, mirror still, and completely full. Imagine the cool mountain air moving directly across that brimful stone basin. Feel how spacious and self-filling your internal core really is. The spring flows into its natural container, and with every breath, your chest flexes without resistance, receiving its own vitality without a single wooden pump to strain your frame. If your mind strays back into its old habit of auditing your devotion or calculating how to win someone's approval, there is no need to feel disappointed in yourself. Your mind has been trying to protect you from the pain of rejection for a very long time, and old habits of frantic overgiving do not vanish in a single hour. Whenever you catch yourself reaching for the wooden handle again, simply notice that movement with a soft, forgiving heart. You can quietly say to yourself, "My mind is trying to force the siphon again." And then imagine letting your gaze return to that deep limestone basin filling effortlessly in the dark once more. You can return to this quiet stone terrace whenever you are ready, as many times as you need tonight. There is no relational exam you must pass before you are permitted to fall asleep. You do not need to earn another person's affection tonight, nor do you need to balance every one-sided dynamic before dawn arrives. Healing your relationship with your own worth is not a sudden event where all longing vanishes forever. It is a series of quiet, hidden moments where you choose to set down the boxwood piston and permit your own vessel to fill first. Even a single breath spent honoring your natural limits permits your nervous system to taste the deep safety that lives beyond desperate striving. Feel the easy, natural movement of your lungs, continuing their silent work in the dark. Cool air fills your chest, lifting your ribs slightly, and flows out with a long, soft fall. The solid weight of your head, your shoulders, and your hips is completely supported by the bed beneath you. You do not need to force love to run uphill tonight. You do not need to prove your value to anyone before morning comes. The mattress is holding you, the room is enclosing you, and the broad limestone bedrock of this present hour is completely level enough to carry your rest. In a short while, We will travel down to a terraced plum orchard, where an elder monastic shows how water nourishes every root naturally when stone intake plugs are removed from the channel. But for now, allow yourself to remain right here in your bed. Let the image of the brimful stone basin rest quietly behind your eyes. Let your jaw remain loose and your hands soft upon the sheets, knowing that nothing needs to be forced, nothing needs to be pumped, and that your tired heart is completely safe enough to let its own water settle tonight. Farther down the mountain slope, where the steep rock terraces leveled out into terraced plum groves near a stone springhouse, the night air smelled of damp, rich clay, ripe plum skins, sweet clover, wet slate, and wood smoke. Working as an assistant gardener in this orchard was a young woman named May, who wrestled with a deep, subtle terror of being overlooked and replaced. May was responsible for tending the young saplings that grew on the middle stone terrace. She lived under an intense compulsion to earn the favor of a senior harvester who consistently ignored her efforts, giving all his praise to other workers while treating May as an invisible laborer. This desperate hunger for validation drove me into a harmful, controlling action. Whenever night fell and mountain water began its natural descent through the stone channels, panic seized Miss Chest in her right hand. She carried a heavy limestone intake plug, carved with a square fitting to block stone spillways. She convinced herself that if she could redirect the orchard's main spring water exclusively into the senior harvester's dry upper plot, he would finally see her devotion, appreciate her loyalty, and grant her the acceptance she craved. On a freezing midnight, as heavy rain turned the orchard paths into slick gray mud, emotional desperation boiled over into panic. The senior harvester had walked past her earlier without even nodding, praising a junior worker, while ignoring the basket of harvested fruit May had spent 6 hours gathering. Feeling a cold, sharp contraction behind her ribs, May ran to the main stone junction with her heavy limestone intake plug. She jammed the heavy limestone plug directly into the lower spillway gate, blocking the water from reaching her own young plum trees. She hammered the stone block deep into the groove with a heavy wooden mallet, forcing the entire spring stream into a narrow, raised channel that led straight up toward the senior harvester's land. She stood back in the cold rain, wiping mud from her forehead, watching the water surge into the upper ditch. Because she had jammed the main lower spillway, the diverted water could not move smoothly along its natural gradient. Instead of filling the orchard evenly, the back-pressured stream crested the high stone wall, washing away topsoil and pouring into a muddy ditch where young saplings were submerged under 4 feet of standing water. Meanwhile, the diverted upper ditch overflowed, drowning the senior harvester's fruit beds while leaving Mia's own section parched, cracked, and completely deprived of nourishment. Mia dropped her wooden mallet into the muck, falling onto her knees beside the flooded ditch. Cold mud soaked through her linen trousers as she frantically tried to dig out the submerged roots with her bare hands. Tears of frustration washed down her cheeks. In her mind, those drowning saplings were proof of her utter worthlessness. She believed that no matter how much water she sacrificed or how hard she worked, she was destined to remain unchosen, unvalued, and permanently discarded in the mud. Moving steadily along the mossy stone pathway, carrying a woven straw lantern that cast a warm circle of amber light on the wet slate, came Sister May. Sister May was an elder monastic orchardist who had tended the terraced plum trees for nearly 50 years. She wore a dark wool cloak, her face etched with soft, deep lines like aged timber, her eyes holding the quiet depth of a mountain lake. She had quietly observed Myaslanite manipulations for weeks, watching how the young gardener starved her own trees to force water towards someone who never asked for it. Sister May set her lantern down on a dry stone bench and walked over to the flooded spillway. She did not raise her voice in anger over the muddy mess, nor did she offer quick words of pity to dry Mia's tears instead. She handed May an iron lever rod, pointing directly to the heavy limestone intake plug wedged deep in the channel. Sister May asked May to pry out the limestone plug and let the spring see where it wanted to go. May hesitated, her hands shivering with cold and shame. She feared that removing the plug would mean giving up her last chance to earn the harvester's notice. Yet, looking at her drowning saplings, she realized her desperate control had brought only ruin. With a long, shuddering breath, she jammed the iron rod under the stone edge and leveraged the heavy limestone intake plug out of the groove. With a deep sucking gurgle, the trapped water released its tension. The muddy backlog drained rapidly out of the ditch, and the crystal-clear mountain spring resumed its natural downhill course. The water flowed smoothly into the lower terrace channels, distributing its nourishment evenly across every level of the orchard. Sister May picked up the wet limestone plug from the mud. She laid it across a flat stone wall and asked May why she was trying to force water uphill to nourish a field that was already turning her away, while her own young trees were dying of thirst. May stared at the limestone plug, listening to the gentle musical trickle of the spring filling her own terraced basin. A quiet, profound shift occurred deep inside May's chest. She saw with startling clarity how her whole life had been spent jamming mental stone plugs into her own heart, starving her own soul of care, rest, and dignity just to divert her vitality toward people who never valued her gift. She recognized that her desperate desire to be chosen had turned her into her own worst enemy, leaving her spirit parched while she chased a cold shadow. She did not throw the limestone plug into the ravine with anger. Instead, she picked it up, carried it over to the stone spring house, and set it neatly on a dry timber shelf beside the unused tools. Choosing to leave the water channel permanently open, she returned to her section and picked up a wooden rake. She did not run to the senior harvester's plot to explain herself or ask for forgiveness. Instead, she simply cleared the mud away from her own young plum saplings, gently resetting their roots in the damp clay. For the first time in years, when a sharp wave of longing for approval touched her throat, she paused. She took a slow, deep breath of the wood smoke air, stepped back from the channel, and allowed her own stone basin to fill to the brim, content to let her own garden drink first tonight. The rain turned to a soft, misty drizzle over the mountain orchard, and the spring water flowed peacefully through its terrace channels, feeding every tree in its own unhurried time. Mai sat quietly under the eaves of the spring house with Sister May, watching the clear water reflect the night stars, letting her heart settle into the vast unforced abundance of the earth. The quiet image of me placing the heavy limestone intake plug onto the timber shelf reveals the hidden emotional mechanism behind our deepest late-night exhaustion. We spend so much of our lives acting like anxious waterkeepers, endlessly trying to block our natural spillways and divert our vital streams toward dry, distant plots, terrified that if we do not overgive, we carry no worth. When someone fails to match your emotional investment, when a partner takes your presence for granted, or when a friend forgets to check in on your world, your thinking immediately treats that imbalance as a terrible emergency. You begin to audit your entire personality, searching for hidden defects, trying to fix your feeling of unworthiness through relentless self-criticism, excessive overgiving, and deep internal shame. This frantic drive to force emotional reciprocity from people who cannot or will not offer it is powered by a subterranean fear of being permanently abandoned. We rehearse terrifying future scenarios, replay cold interactions from months ago, and try to cure our relational pain by dousing our boundaries in total self-denial. We start to view our legitimate emotional needs as an embarrassing burden that must be suppressed. We stop experiencing our life as a natural, self-nourishing stream and begin treating our spirit as a leaky pump that must be violently cranked until its seals shatter. Yet this habit of jamming stone plugs into your own spillway is an internal war that converts simple disappointment into unbearable, long-term agony. When you refuse to let your mountain spring follow its natural level, you live in constant friction with your own heart. You begin to define your identity through your unrequited sacrifices, turning your emotional depletion into a permanent badge of honor. You stop feeling the cool, abundant water filling your own basin, because your mind is completely consumed by the muddy floods and parched soil of your forced diversions. Buddhist reflection brings a clear, illuminating light to this struggle, showing us the crucial difference between the natural pain life brings and the heavy, extra suffering our own minds construct through control and resistance. Moving through an interconnected world means that people will sometimes let you down. Certain connections will remain uneven, and emotional balance will not always be returned in equal measure. Those natural limits in others are simple, unavoidable realities of living among human beings. However, the agonizing, sleepless depletion that keeps your breastbone tight at midnight is not the other person's coldness or lack of appreciation. It is the extra misery generated by your decision to force water uphill against the natural slope of their heart, punishing yourself because you could not compel them to value your gift. It is like an orchard keeper who, upon seeing a dry season touch the upper ridge, furiously builds stone dams across her own lower terrace until her saplings drown in mud. Weeping that the sky has ruined her harvest, the dry weather on the upper ridge is the primary reality of the climate. The flooded ditches ruin soil, and bitter heartbreak are the secondary suffering created entirely by her refusal to let the spring flow where it naturally belongs. True peace does not arrive when you finally engineer a heroic sacrifice that forces an emotionally distant person to love you back. Freedom begins the very moment you set the limestone plug on the shelf, step back from the stone spillway, and sit quietly beside your own terraced well without demanding that anyone bow to your generosity. The surrounding world will continue to move through its own unpredictable seasons. You can offer genuine kindness, share your authentic warmth, and cultivate healthy bonds, but breaking your own internal valves will never turn a dry cistern into a living spring. Consider how much of your internal burnout comes from attempting to force a mountain gravity channel to run backward up a cliff. We collapse into Latinite exhaustion because we falsely believe that protecting our own emotional reservoir is an act of selfish cruelty. But your true nature is not a dry, endless pump that exists only to be drained by others. Your awareness is like the deep stone terrace itself, solid, level, grounded, and clear, capable of holding cool spring water to the brim without needing to apologize for its fullness. When you surrender the impossible demand to force emotional reciprocity from an unholding heart, a massive weight dissolves from your chest. The tight, guarded muscles around your throat and ribs, which have been strained for years to maintain a posture of endless giving, can finally begin to soften. Your lungs find room to draw a long, unhurried breath of mountain air. You begin to understand that allowing your own basin to fill first, letting your care flow naturally without being forced through shame, is not a cold retreat. It is the fundamental foundation of authentic wisdom. You are fully permitted to be a quiet limestone well holding cool spring water tonight, resting in your own level depth rather than forcing a muddy flood for approval. Your value as a human being was never tied to how much self-neglect you could endure for those who take you for granted. You were born with an abundant, noble spring, fully equipped to hold its own water in peace, capable of nourishing the world from your overflow rather than your depletion. As you lie here in the dark, feeling the calm air move softly across your pillow, notice when your mind attempts to pull you back into its old plugging habits. It might whisper that you are being selfish for resting, or that you must sacrifice more of your peace before morning comes. Observe that thought with soft, unhurried presence. You do not need to fight the thought, nor do you need to pick up a single tool for it. You can simply view it as a wisp of night fog drifting across wet slate, carrying no power to drain the deep, crystal clear water resting safely within your room. This wisdom of laying down the boxwood piston, clearing the mud from the stone spillway, and allowing your internal spring to fill its own lower basin, belongs directly inside the small, demanding moments of your modern routine. It finds its truest purpose during those quiet hours, when your mind starts frantically trying to force water uphill out of a deep terror of being unchosen and forgotten. Consider how easily this habit of emotional overpumping shows up on a completely ordinary afternoon. You sit at a desk or stand in a crowded hallway, holding your glowing phone with a tight, anxious grip while waiting for a reply to a message you sent hours ago. An unexpected silence stretches across the screen. A partner offers a cold, distracted onward answer, or an old friend routinely fails to match the care you pour into the relationship. Immediately, a sharp contraction hits your solar plexus. Instead of allowing that quiet space to remain a natural, spacious interval where your mountain stream simply holds its own level, your mind panics. You reach for the heavy wooden crank of self-neglect, drafting forced follow-up notes, overanalyzing your tone. and scolding yourself for not giving enough to earn their warmth long before the sun goes down. In that exact moment, when the bright screen glows in your trembling hand, you are trying to force a split boxwood valve against gravity to fill a dry cistern. But wisdom offers you a quiet, spacious choice before you shred your leather washers. You can set your phone face down upon the table. You can feel the solid floor supporting your heels. Draw one slow, unhurried breath into your abdomen, and let the desperate urge to overgive dissolve into the room. Choosing not to obey that sudden impulse of panic is how you set down the crank. It is a brave, quiet decision to let your lower spillway remain open, trusting that your presence carries an abundant, natural weight without needing to force affection from an unholding heart. Or think about those heavy late nights when you carry an exhausting guilt for wanting to rest without having secured a guarantee of mutual devotion first. You lie down after a long day of carrying all the emotional labor in your home or workplace, feeling a sore tightness in your ribs from holding up dynamics that offer nothing in return. Yet the moment your head touches the pillow, an internal audit begins. It reviews every interaction, scolds you for setting a basic boundary, and insists that taking time for your own replenishment is a selfish failure. You pretend to be completely fine, smiling through an unbearable weight, while a cold, hollow ache churns behind your breastbone. When those waves of relational anxiety and false guilt threaten to steal your sleep, you can choose to stop treating your self-care as a crime. You do not need to prove your loyalty by draining your own well dry. You can allow your awareness to settle like a deep limestone basin resting level on a quiet terrace, holding its cool water without apologizing for its fullness, giving yourself full permission to close your eyes, to leave an unbalanced relationship unresolved until tomorrow, or to lie still in the dark without fixing another person's. Mood is how you permit your tired heart to fill its own basin in peace. Notice too how often this fear of being discarded leaks into your daily rhythm through constant comparison and social fear. You see others moving through life with seemingly effortless connections, and your mind immediately assumes that you are lagging behind, hopelessly defective, or destined to be left alone. You check your device for quick reassurance, replay past mistakes where you felt rejected, and attempt to control the future by calculating how to become more useful to everyone around you, treating your inner spring like a mechanical pump that must be forced to run every single minute. Yet the deep stone basin resting on the mountain slope does not earn its purity by chasing the clouds across the peak. It holds its crystal clear water steadily precisely because it was built to let gravity do its silent work. Peace is not a reward reserved only for those who manage to secure total devotion from everyone they meet. Peace is the natural, quiet ground that emerges the moment you stop treating your boundaries as a flaw, giving yourself unconditional permission to rest flat in this dark room tonight, without calculating your relational security or begging for emotional crumbs, is how you align your spirit with the deep wisdom of the terraced well. Living this path in your modern life does not mean you shut down your warmth or turn away from genuine connection. It expresses itself in the softest, most practical pauses of your day. It is taking a gentle breath before reacting with frantic overgiving to a moment of distance. It is choosing to put down the iron lever when your mind demands that you sacrifice your peace for someone who takes you for granted. It is the quiet, steady realization that your heart is not an artificial siphon meant to burn its parts in vain, but a natural, self-filling reservoir that naturally overflows when allowed to rest in its own depth. You do not need to solve your one-sided relationships by tomorrow morning. The Zen path is not about instantly erasing every old habit of relational anxiety that made you reach for the wooden crank in the past. It is simply about noticing the moment your fingers tighten around the handle out of fear, and gently choosing to lay the boxwood piston on the stone bench instead. When you practice living as a level stone well holding its cool water, rather than a strained pump breaking its seals, your daily life recovers an unshakable dignity. You can offer sincere love, share your authentic care, and then return to your own quiet depth when the day is done. You step out of the exhausting role of the desperate pursuer, returning to your true nature as an abundant, self-sustaining spring of unforced presence. as these late hours settle softly over your room right now. Allow these simple truths to cool the remaining friction in your nerves. You have turned enough heavy handles and cleared enough muddy ditches through wet orchard paths today. You have jammed enough stone plugs into your own spirit to satisfy your mind's internal judges. The long day of measuring your emotional return, checking for texts, and fearing rejection has fully retreated into the dark. The night has opened a vast, peaceful sanctuary around your bed, offering a shelter where no water needs to be forced uphill, no piston needs to crack, and no heart needs to feel depleted. Feel the easy, natural movement of your chest continuing its silent work in the dark. Cool air fills your lungs, lifting your ribs slightly, and flows out with a long, soft fall. You are completely permitted to set down your wooden cranks and stone plugs for the night. You are allowed to let every relational worry, every comparative fear, and every dread of being forgotten dissolve into the wide, dark stillness outside your room. The broad, patient limestone bedrock of this present hour is holding you, deep and level, ready to support your full weight without asking for a single sacrifice tonight now. Let every hand-carved boxwood siphon valve piston, every torn leather washer, and every heavy limestone intake plug dissolve quietly into the cool night mist of the mountain terrace. The quiet journeys of Kale setting down his split pump handle in the high courtyard, and me lifting her stone plug out of the muddy spillway have finished their steady work within your spirit. They are no longer distant parables told beside a stone fountain, but are soaking down like clear spring water filtering through layers of slate, permeating the subterranean depths of your awareness. The frantic struggle to force your devotion uphill against gravity has completely stopped. The wooden crank rests motionless. The terraced orchard stands peaceful in the dark, leaving your hands soft, cool, and resting unburdened upon the sheets. Your physical frame is becoming deeply, delightfully heavy against the level mattress beneath you. Feel your shoulders, your chest, and your hips yielding their last subtle bracing, sinking half an inch deeper into the soft bedding. Your eyelids feel weighted, smooth, and completely relaxed, as if a gentle draft of wet limestone dust, crushed wild mint, damp pine bark, cold mountain mist, and dry oak leaf ash had brushed over your forehead, clearing away every remaining trace of relational depletion and unreturned care. The subtle tightness behind your eyes, your jaw, and your solar plexus dissolves completely, allowing your airway to open into an easy, spacious channel where cool night air moves softly, carrying no need to earn love or force another's heart tonight. Every breath you draw now is growing slower, softer, and completely silent. A quiet stream of air enters, lifting your ribs like mountain water gliding into a carved stone channel, and then glides out like a deep, crystal-clear basin settling into perfect mirror stillness. Inhale, slow, smooth, and effortless. Exhale, long, quiet, and uncalculated. You are not measuring your relational debt. You are simply letting your own deep basin fill itself, level, calm, and completely brimful upon its stone foundation. Picture a quiet stone terrace at midnight, carved into the lower slope of a high mountain pass. Outside, a soft, damp mountain fog wraps gently around the mossy slate walls, carrying the subtle sense of damp, rich clay, ripe plum skins, sweet clover, wet slate, and wood smoke. In the center of the terrace, a deep limestone basin rests level, brimful, and completely still under a starry sky. There are no wooden handles to turn, no copper pipes straining under pressure, and no heavy stone plugs blocking the natural channels. The spring water flows into the basin with an effortless, musical gurgle, filling its dark chamber to the very edge, spilling its quiet surplus softly into the wild mint beds below without breaking a single seal. Inside your own chest, that exact same unforced, self-filling capacity is quietly resting right now. The sharp ache of unreturned care and the old fear of being unchosen have dissolved into the cool night air. They have drifted out through the terrace spillways, carried away into the vast mountain night where no living soul needs to bleed its valves to prove its devotion. You do not need to be chased by anyone to step into tomorrow. You do not need to balance every dynamic to deserve deep rest. The vast night is level enough to hold every quiet heart, and gentle enough to let your inner spring settle without making a single demand. Feel the deep heaviness in your thighs, knees, and ankles, melting into the supportive bed beneath you. Feel your feet and toes resting motionless upon the sheets, completely freed from the long hours of running up steep rock paths and chasing cold shadows. There are no relational debts you must collect in this dark room tonight, no emotional sacrifices you must perform, and no drought powerful enough to drain the quiet, noble beauty of your presence right now. You have returned home to the level, self-filling basin that was always yours. Give your mind total permission to drop its long, exhausting watch over your relational worth. You do not have to solve your unrequited devotion. You do not need to guarantee mutual care before morning comes. Your future hours belong to the mountain sky outside, and you are resting far down the terraced slope now, where boxwood pistons hold no purpose, and forcing water uphill is no longer required. If a stray thought about an unappreciated gesture or an old fear of being taken for granted floats through the dark, let it be like a wisp of mountain mist drifting across wet slate, touching the stone edge briefly before dissolving into the vast night sky. You do not need to reach for the wooden crank. You do not need to pick up the stone plug. You can simply watch the cool water fill your own basin, leaving your internal reservoir clear, level, and completely undisturbed. The night has built a quiet, impenetrable sanctuary around your bed, protecting your emotional weariness from the relentless demands and one-sided strain of the world outside. The morning will arrive in its own time, bringing its own light and its own natural flow to your hands. But tonight belongs entirely to rest. Tonight is a sacred sanctuary where your spirit is permitted to set down its tools, clear away its muddy ditches, and sink into the rich, unhurried ease of its present brimful nature. You are safe here in the quiet dark. Your heart knows how to hold its own water without forced pumping. Your spirit knows how to let gravity do its silent work. Your core awareness knows how to rest when the mind finally stops forcing the siphon and lets its level basin hold the night in peace. Let yourself sink down through the soft, dark layers of sleep, floating down into the deep, quiet limestone bedrock where no pumps groan, where no spillways are blocked, and where your true nature rests forever full, whole, and profoundly at peace. When a deep stone basin holds the mountain spring to its mossy brim, does the water ever need to strain its heart to prove it belongs to the earth? The cool mountain mist drifts softly across the mossy stone terrace, cradling the brimful limestone basin in a quiet, unbroken darkness that asks for no labor, no sacrifice, and no proof of devotion. In this high mountain sanctuary, the crystal-clear water resting beneath the starry sky does not fight the gravity of the earth, nor does it strain to force its vitality up the sheer rock faces above. It rests on its solid stone foundation in total, peaceful surrender to the quiet hour, allowing the mountain spring to fill its chamber naturally, while spilling its gentle excess into the wild mint beds below. When you permit your own spirit to rest in this same unforced stillness, you begin to see that your inner capacity for care was never meant to be a strained pump burning its seals in vain. It is a deep, self-filling reservoir, a sacred, level basin where your heart can finally unburden itself from the exhausting compulsion to chase, overgive, and force emotional warmth from unholding hands. Consider how the natural mountain spring fills the lower terraced well night after night through changing seasons. It does not demand that the dry cliffs above send back a single drop of water before it permits its own basin to become full. Nor does it force its current upward through cracked wooden pipes when the channels above remain blocked. It simply rests where it belongs, holding its cool depth with quiet dignity, allowing its abundance to overflow effortlessly when its own chamber is complete. When you look upon your own life through this compassionate lens, you realize that your heavy emotional depletion was never caused by your capacity to love. It grew entirely from the anxious habit of trying to force your water straight up a granite wall, treating another person's emotional limits as a personal failure that you had to conquer through total self-neglect. You do not need to shred your own peace to prove the nobility of your heart. Your inner spring, resting level and whole within your chest, is already completely enough to sustain your life without asking you to break your own valves. Allow your physical frame to sink even deeper into the broad, unyielding support of the bed beneath you. Feel the steady mattress carrying your shoulders, your spine, your lower ribs, and your hips in complete, unconditioned comfort. Your breath moves in a slow, rhythmic cadence, like the soft, musical trickle of spring water gliding through carved limestone channels, entering and leaving without a single moment of strain. There are no relational debts you must reconcile in the dark. There are no unbalanced dynamics you must repair before sunrise arrives. You are not failing anyone by resting in your own deep basin tonight. And your worth is not diminished because someone failed to appreciate your care. You are resting safely inside your own terrace sanctuary, where no wooden crank needs to be turned and no sacrifice is ever demanded. The cool, damp air surrounding your bed carries a quiet, grounding presence that invites every remaining knot in your body to soften into the bedding. In this peaceful room, you are not an anxious waterkeeper struggling at a leaking pump, nor are you an unchosen laborer begging for emotional crumbs. You are simply a living soul held gently by the quiet earth, fully permitted to exist in your raw, unforced fullness. Everything that demanded your exhausting vigilance today has been set aside outside the terrace walls. The hand-carved boxwood piston rests cold upon the stone bench. The limestone intake plug lies untouched on the timber shelf, and the broad mountain pass holds its silent wells in complete, unshakable tranquility. Think of how the high stone terraces outside hold the vast night in quiet shelter. The heavy slate walls, the limestone channels, the dark soil, and the brimful stone basins all rest together under the starry sky without a single conflict. They do not compete for position, nor do they panic over the dry places on the upper ridge. They yield to the earth with quiet dignity, trusting that the mountain spring beneath them remains deep, pure, and endless. Your heart belongs to that same natural world. It knows how to hold its own water in peace without demanding a return. You do not need to force love to run uphill. You need only to allow your own basin to rest in the spacious stillness that fills this hour. Let the soft weight of your head sink deeper into the pillow. Let your forehead, your jaw, and the guarded muscles around your throat release their very last hold on the day. Feel how quiet your breath has become, moving like cool mountain water settling into a dark stone basin, smooth, silent, and completely unhurried. Every inhalation brings fresh, soothing ease into your frame, and every exhalation releases the lingering compulsion to force devotion from an unholding heart. You are fully permitted to set down your wooden cranks and stone plugs. You are allowed to be quiet, to be still, and to let your tired heart absorb its natural fullness in peace while you sleep. As you float closer to deep, unbroken sleep, feel the quiet comfort of knowing that your true capacity for love was never dependent on forced reciprocity. Your presence is a deep, self-filling well, taking its depth from an unshakable inner spring that no emotional drought can ever drain. The quiet dignity you carry, the soft warmth you bring to your life, and the peaceful space you hold are woven deeply into the bedrock of who you are right now. You carry that timeless, self-filling truth within your spirit, cool, clear, and level like a limestone basin resting undisturbed in the mountain mist. There are no relational audits left to conduct, no stone plugs left to hammer into the spillway, and no fears of being unchosen left to fight in the dark. The wind moves softly through the plum trees. The stone channels are clear, and the room is wrapped in soft, protective darkness. Let your awareness dissolve gently into the quiet stillness around your bed. Let your body sink down through the cool, soothing layers of rest, supported by the broad, unyielding earth beneath your home. Floating down into the deep, dark sanctuary of sleep. You are held, you are safe, and your brimful heart rests forever unburdened, whole, and profoundly at peace. The mossy slate walls of the stone terrace hold the night with patient strength, shielding your rest from the cold mountain drafts that sweep across the high peaks. Beneath the open sky, the air remains soft, cool, and fragrant with the quiet scents of damp clay, ripe fruit, wet slate, and sweet clover. Every moment in this peaceful space reminds your body that it is safe to lay down its guard, offering an unburdened shelter where no spirit is judged by its boundaries. You do not need to prove your value before sunrise, nor do you need to justify your rest to the world outside. Simply lying here in the cool dark, feeling the natural, easy rhythm of your breath, is completely enough to restore your soul. Notice how the soft rise and fall of your chest aligns with the quiet stillness of the night. Inhaling softly brings cool, clear rest into your body, and exhaling softly lets that rest settle into the deep, unforced center of your spirit. With every quiet breath, your limbs grow heavier, your thoughts drift farther away, and the boundary between your awareness and the peaceful darkness around you gently fades. You are enclosed by a vast, protective quiet that knows no fear of unreturned devotion and no dread of silent hours. Everything is still, everything is resting, and the vast night sky holds your life in total, effortless safety. Let yourself sink softly into the dark, welcoming soil of deep sleep. Feel your mind letting go of its last relational worries, like fine limestone dust settling quietly onto stone workshop floors. There are no pump handles waiting for your hands in the dark, no emotional debts to collect, and no dry cisterns to fear before the sun rises. You are resting inside your own unforced sanctuary, cradled in the deep, enduring peace of your own brimful nature. Sleep arrives naturally now, smooth, soft, and profound, carrying your tired spirit into total rest.